All right, so let's get started. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. My name is Acie Tran. Some of you guys may know me as Coach Acie. I'd like to welcome everyone who's joined us tonight to discuss the very important and often overlooked topic of men's mental health. This discussion itself is a fundraiser for Movember Canada. So I'd like to ask if you guys are able to give generously to this wonderful charity that is fighting things like prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and the betterment of men's mental health, which is what we're here to discuss. Just a couple of statistics from Movember Canada. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among Canadian males aged 15 to 44. Each year, more than 2,900 men die in Canada because of suicide, and 3 out of 4 deaths by suicide are committed, unfortunately, by men. And despite all of this, the fight for men's mental health continues to be an uphill climb. Funding, support, and awareness for men's mental health has been almost non-existent due to the stigma and difficulties men face with opening up. Most men will tell you this is something that we're still struggling with to this day, including the panelists and myself. But just like a grand journey that begins with a single step, we set our feet down today to make one of those very first steps. We're going to be exploring many topics today, from masculinity to stigma and parenthood even, and circling it all back to mental health. So guys, please take whatever you hear today, continue this conversation outside of this call into the real world with the men in your lives as we build towards healthier masculinity for a better tomorrow. So again, folks, we're very grateful for your attendance. And I'd like to give a round of applause to all of you for showing up today for men's mental health. So
rock on.
Yeah, let's go. All right.
Rock on. Party on, Garth.
So at this time, I'd like to, without further ado, introduce you guys to our wonderful panel. Okay. Starting first with Tuan Nguyen. So Tuan is a dad, a tech entrepreneur, a 3-time TEDx speaker. He is the founder of Health Genie, a multi-million-dollar firm serving private health organizations. He co-founded and runs a biz dad tribe called DudeBuddha, which is an invite-only anonymous community that supports fathers in growing businesses while gaining the tools and resources to deepen connections with themselves and their families. His passion is in fatherhood and in volunteerism. He raises 7 children ranging from the ages of 8 to 18 and is often sought after for parenting, business, and kidpreneurship advice. Pleasure to have you, Tuan. You want to say something so you're on camera for a second?
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Ready to roll.
All right. Up next, we have Eric MacDougall, who is a devoted husband and father of 2. He is a fatherhood and marriage coach, as well as the lead coach for the Dad Edge Alliance, an organization devoted to helping fathers thrive in their lives. During the day, he is a beverage manager for the popular Ottawa restaurant Atelier. And with this responsibility, he is an advocate for sobriety within the restaurant industry. He describes himself as an imperfect father focused on servant leadership for his family and his community. Thank you for joining us today, Eric. Take a bow.
Thanks, Acie. Thanks for having me, man. Good to be here.
No problem. Thanks. Grateful to have you, man. Third, we have Dr. Yousuf Siddiqui, who is a naturopathic doctor and sex therapist. Dr. Yousuf is passionate about natural medicine. He received his degree from the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine in Toronto and is currently practicing in Ottawa. Also, he's currently the naturopathic medical advisor to BioLanreco, a distributor of high-quality therapeutic products. Dr. Yousuf believes that we have infinite potential and that genetics, family behaviors, hormonal and biochemical imbalances can prevent us from feeling like our optimal selves. Dr. Yousuf, are you there?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that really grand introduction.
You guys all deserve it, trust me. Finally, and last and definitely not least, we have Jesse Reynolds, who is a Canadian actor, host, and stand-up comedian that is best known for hosting the popular radio show Jump Mornings with Jesse and Jenna from 2014 to 2018, and then launching Jesse and Jenna's Messy podcast, which debuted at #1 on the Apple Canada podcasting charts. He also serves as an adjudicator for the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council. Jesse is an openly gay man and has long advocated for LGBTQ community and rights. And finally, he co-founded the inaugural Queer Sphere Expo, an annual consumer show highlighting the best in LGBTQ friendly businesses. Jesse, where are you at?
I'm here. Thank you for having me, Acie.
All right.
Spending my nights in a room full of handsome men is what I like. So I'm going to fit right in.
Hey, you know what? We will echo that sentiment for sure. So gentlemen, what an honor it is to be sitting here with you guys, chopping it up about men's mental health. A virtual round of applause, everybody. We're going to have a lot of we're going to have a lot of fun tonight. Okay, so to kick us off, I'd like to invite our keynote speaker to say a few words about his own journey with some of the things that he's gone through in his life and his affiliation and his advocacy for the Movember organization. Our speaker today is a two-time leukemia and testicular cancer survivor. At just the age of 23 years old, Nicholas Siddiqui is a young man who aspires to become a mental health counselor in his own right. He recently graduated from Carleton University with a degree in psychology and will share his experience having fought and won against cancer twice and with his own advocacy for Movember Canada. He's currently working for Health Canada on the corporate services branch, mental health and wellness team. Nick, over to you.
Thanks for having me, Andy. It's great to be on here with all these guys talking about something like so important. So so I'll start. Thanks. So it's great that we can all come here together to chat about the importance of men's mental health. I'll start by sharing a little bit about myself. You may have covered some of it, Andy, but I'm 23. I'm very passionate about mental health. Studied psychology at Carleton University, and I'm supposed to be starting my master's in counseling in January. So I'm quite excited for that. And the main reason I'm here today is to share my experience with cancer. So I've been diagnosed twice, once with leukemia at the age of 4. I did my treatment, and that consisted of chemotherapy, and I recovered fully, and life went pretty much back to normal after that. 12 years later, I was confronted with yet another cancer, this time testicular cancer. So I was 16 years old when that happened. Luckily, it was discovered during the early stages, so it didn't spread throughout the rest of my body. I had surgery scheduled the following day, and the cancer was removed. Now, you might think this is the end of the story, but it's not. This is just the beginning, because I didn't share this with others. I was afraid of what they would think about having one ball, like, oh, you're less of a man now. What are the girls going to think? I was all over the place. It was really personal for me, and I just didn't feel right. And then I started opening up about my experience, and I started talking about it. And I did start to feel better. I felt like I could be who I am without hiding it. Even though something was taken from me, I did gain a lot of other things, like support from friends, from teachers, from colleagues. I developed resilience, confidence, and just so much more. So the takeaway from this talk and everything, whether it's about mental health, prostate cancer, testicular cancer, whatever it is, we have to raise awareness to prevent these issues before they happen. And the only way people will know about it is if we talk about it and let them know what's happening, what's going on, how do we feel. Don't sweat it. There is support available. People do care, and they will help. That's my story. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for sharing your story, Nick, so bravely and so openly. And, it's been a pleasure knowing you and working with you on the mental health team at CSB. So wouldn't have had anybody better to open this up than you. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks again. I just want to add one more thing. Andy actually really helped me open up about this experience. It was really through him that I first started talking about it, and he got me on this podcast that we held last Movember, and it was great. It was the first time I actually shared this to the world, my story, and what it was about, and just everything. I think it matters. People like to see that you're not alone. Recovery is possible. Thanks.
I appreciate that, man. We had a lot of fun recording that podcast too, for sure. So yeah, let's get started, folks. Folks are on the line. They want to hear as you guys talk. So I'm going to stop taking up all the space and all the spotlight. So here's how this is going to go. I'm going to begin by asking a few questions to specific panelists, and then really just letting them, just let her rip. At any point on the other panelists, feel free to chime in, but please allow the panelist who's speaking to get their point across. This isn't the U.S. presidential debate, so let's be fair with each other. There is the raise hand function, so if you guys have something to say, raise your hands. And folks on the line, feel free to ask your questions at any time using the Q&A function. We'll be answering your questions in the last half an hour of the event, and you do have an option to upvote different questions too. If there's going to be a lot of questions, of course, we're not going to be able to get to all of them. So the ones that you like, the ones that resonate with you, make sure you guys upvote those, and then we'll make sure that those ones get answered by our wonderful panelists. So starting with question number 1, and we're going to explore masculinity, because the idea of masculinity and its validity is the root cause of men's struggles with mental health. So my first question goes to Jesse Reynolds. The idea of masculinity and its validity is one of the root causes, as I mentioned, with men's mental health. Everybody has their own idea of what masculinity is, but there's a collective societal agreement to kind of what masculinity is and what it looks like. So you yourself, as a gay man, how do you define masculinity? And can you talk about the role that these stereotypes have played in your life and how they've personally affected you?
Well, masculinity is hot. That's what it is, Acie. It's sexy. Let's start there. I think masculinity, whether gay or straight, I mean, it's the same concept. And I think the challenges cross over a lot. In my experience, though, gay men sort of have it amplified because, or until now anyway, it's always been, if you're gay, you couldn't possibly be a fully formed man. Like, we're always having to prove ourselves as still masculine and we're still men just because we're gay. So there's always that on top of everything. So I think that's why you see a lot of the times gay men strive to be really successful or good looking, or, you know, maybe even sleep around a lot because they're trying to prove themselves that they can live up to that ideal of masculinity. And so yeah, there's definitely been a lot of that in my life, but I forget your question already because it was so long-winded.
Oh, well, maybe talk about that. Like, how did it evolve through your life? The idea of masculinity, especially, and let's go back to the time when you came out. And I remember you telling me that was sometime around high school, you said. So it's interesting to get your take on this and your story.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a really interesting point because in high school, I came out when I was 17 and I didn't want to. I was one of these kids that was like, I'm never going to come out because I didn't think my parents would accept me. And how I found, I don't know if you guys remember car rallies in grade 12, but we used to, like, day before grad, you'd go and you have to do all these like things like steal a mailbox or, you know, horrible things that you should never do, kids. But I was at this car rally and my mom called me and she was screaming on the phone because she had found under my bed a gift that I was going to give my boyfriend at the time. We'd been dating 2 months, 17 years old. So I had some stupid picture blown up and I wrote on it, "Happy 2 months, baby." And I was hiding it under my bed to give to him. And as moms do, she was snooping and she found it. And so she called me freaking out. So here I am, like, half drunk, right? Day before grade 12 graduation. And my mom's yelling at me like, you know, this isn't what God wanted for you. And all these things that you've heard on TV 100 million times, all real. So I didn't have a choice as to when I came out. But the positive thing that came from it is as soon as I came out, as soon as my parents knew, I stopped caring what people at school thought. And as soon as I stopped denying it at school, everybody stopped caring, including the jocks and the mean, you know, straight guys that were bullying me before, because once I owned it and I was like, yeah, I am gay, what are you going to do about it? Nobody cared anymore. So, you know, I think a lot of that can spill over into just owning who you are, whether gay, straight, purple, green, is be yourself and people can accept it or not. But it's only when you try to go against who you really are that I find people have a problem with it, or you're not authentic.
Yeah, and that's something personally that I've struggled with for a while. And what really got me into the world of men's mental health is really struggling with my own identity and, you know, what is masculinity? What is the ideal man? What is a good man? What is a bad man? So just trying to unpack all that kind of stuff. And I think the other guys can agree too. And looking deeply within, you know, my ego and, you know, figuring out what role ego has to play with masculinity really was a big step in my journey. But thank you for sharing your story. Other panelists, you guys have any anything you guys would like to add in terms of, you know, ego, masculinity, and maybe struggling with your own idea of masculinity?
I mean, I could speak if I didn't raise my hand, but I guess I'll do this. So I don't know. I guess I never really thought of the term masculinity, probably only until very recently. You know, maybe what it is to be a man. I guess that's probably something that I thought about. But I guess I had two things. You know, first, my dad was pretty chill. He wasn't an ultra masculine, like, come on, let's get rough kind of guy. You know, like, he's just a very chill guy, super empathetic, and, you know, like, just really allowed me to express my feelings. So I think that was other grown adults growing up and seeing how different they were from my dad. Only recently, I would say 5, 6 years. And by the way, my daughter, who's now almost 18, so she's pretty open about it, but she opened up to me about being gay at 13. So, and what I said to her was, it's so amazing for you to know who you are. I'm so happy that you know who you are. Right. And I think that's the reason I said that. I didn't even realize I said that until when she said this to me, I'm like, wow, congratulations. It's so nice that you know who you are. That's important. Let's celebrate it, right? And I think masculinity for me was really not knowing or accepting who I was. I'm growing up in the early 80s. I came here in the mid 70s, and then here I am, an Asian guy in a neighborhood full of Italians, very macho, right? And Portuguese, and then my parents speak Vietnamese, everyone's speaking French and English. I'm from Montreal, by the way, guys. So it was like just really trying to find my own identity, and struggling within that identity is how do I behave as a boy in this community, I guess, right? And I'm torn between all these different directions. By the way, guys, here's my youngest here. Here's Quinn. We have screen time limits. So, but today, since there's a bunch of them upstairs, we are removing screen time for an extra bit. See, this is...
Oh, and we're on the screen too, right?
Yeah. Et voilà, mon beau. De rien. À tantôt. So I think back to the whole masculinity, just, I know there was quite the question earlier, like Jesse said, but for me, when my daughter came out and she said, and she's like, we make statements all the time, which is, I should get back to my original point, which is why I didn't learn recently. It's not about masculinity. It's masculine energy versus feminine energy. Right. And my daughter, we talk, we're like, oh, it's amazing. I can go from total feminine energy to total masculine energy. And I said to her, yeah, me too. Like, I'm the same way. Right. And I think to come to accept that every single one of us has that two types of energy, and it's inside us all. And it's something we should shine and be proud. And when we choose to leverage the masculine versus feminine energy, that's where it's our life's journey. That's where we're going to find, like, sometimes it doesn't feel right. Sometimes it feels great. Sometimes it's, what I mean? This is like my personal journey till this day, where I'm like, maybe that's from a dialogue I had when I was a kid. I don't remember where, at what traumatic point that everyone tries to help me figure out, right? But it's from something, I'm sure, in the past. And I tell myself, okay, this is the point where I shouldn't be shining masculine ego energy. This is just not the right time. It doesn't feel like it's doing anything good for me or anyone around me, right? And so anyways, those are my thoughts. Hopefully that supports anyone around here.
For sure. I'm looking at your hat, I'm looking at your microphone, and it's one of your famous slogans, let's hug it out on there. And what I love about you and Jesse is that you guys both came from a place of self-realization, right? And it's very freeing, as you said, and you mentioned the story with your daughter too, and how it helped free her, and very proud for you to see that as a father as well. But I don't know if any of the other panelists feel the same way with me, but I grew up in a really ultra masculine environment. I didn't have brothers at home, so my brothers were my boys at school. A lot of gangster rap, a lot of chasing women, a lot of stuff like that. And a lot of us, most of us actually still haven't kind of grown past that a little bit. So when we see things like let's hug it out, might make some guys uncomfortable sometimes. And that idea and that realization has really pushed me to kind of get into this work kind of today. So I just wonder if any other panelists kind of had that kind of struggle, that similar struggle as I did in wrestling kind of with their masculinity, and kind of, again, with that societal agreement of kind of what masculinity is, strong, like a boss, like kind of like, overpowering over people and stuff like that. Like, have any of you guys had that experience kind of growing up, and just wondering what your experiences were when you were confronted with that kind of energy?
I can share a bit, or Yousuf, go ahead, man. I'll be a little quick, but for me, when I think about this masculine energy, I think there's a shadow side to it and a healthy side to it. And I think that's the way that I was raised, and I struggled with the dichotomy between those two aspects. So I understood that what masculinity was in terms of, thinking about power and order and all these things. And I think a lot of times when I grew up with just a mother in the home, single mom raising 4 kids. And there was a lot of, don't do that, be quiet, don't be so loud, don't be so strong, don't be so rough. And really this idea of taming that power, because it was viewed in a negative light, right? Because she had only experienced masculinity, the shadow side. So I think it was important for me to grow up and really start understanding, what the healthy side of masculinity was. Because I sometimes think, like all things, including feminine energy, it can be abused or it can be used in a very healthy way. And I think we've seen clear examples of both in our society. So I think my journey was really trying to understand, what this healthy aspect of masculinity looked like. Because I think I was told that all these things were negative, to roughhouse or to be strong or to be loud or anything like that. And when you're told to tame that energy, it can be a little bit confusing.
Go ahead, Dr. Yousuf.
Yeah, and further to what Eric is saying, I couldn't agree more. And what I have observed is that if we look at history, we look at like the feminist movement. Women have had this opportunity to redefine femininity, to redefine what it is to be a woman, right? And all of a sudden, the definition went from 1950s housewife in heels with a martini waiting for her husband to CEO power woman to whatever, right? It's infinite. There's no longer a set definition. And the reason why I love this discussion is that we're talking now about redefining masculinity, redefining what it is to be a man. And in my opinion, he actually passed away, but I had an older brother who was this jock lacrosse player. I am not that. I was like the artsy brother. We totally didn't relate. We didn't see eye to eye in any way at all. But I always looked at him because, in my generation, his behavior, the way that he was kind of put on a pedestal, and I was kind of seen as being more the alternative kind of guy. My parents were, embraced both of us equally, and but my whole life, my whole childhood into my 20s, I always kind of had that expectation that I was supposed to be a certain way. And these types of discussions I find are really, really empowering because it allows us as men to understand that that the definition is and the experience of what it is to be a man is more than just that that classic masculine definition, the provider, the strong, the athlete, that type A dominant personality. To be masculine, it could also be to be quietly confident and creative, or to be vulnerable and to just be vulnerable. I think actually there's more power in vulnerability than there is in the performance. But I don't know, I can go on and on. But my experience is just that it's a really important time for men to start to really broaden that definition.
And I totally agree. And it sounds like you guys all have such a healthy balance and a healthy relationship with your masculinity. But one of the reasons why we put this together is because, a lot of guys don't, and a lot of guys are still having a lot of trouble opening up or even, understanding what healthy masculinity is. So when I bring up the term, toxic masculinity right now, and toxic masculinity has like such a well, it is a negative thing, right? Anything toxic is bad for you. It's poison, basically. So when I say toxic masculinity to you guys, tell me what the first thing that comes up. What do you guys think about it? And maybe, what can we do to help men who may be labeled as such, or maybe be like, experiencing, or, exhibiting behaviors of toxic masculinity?
You got to pick someone, Acie.
All right, that's you, Jesse. Let's go.
I think, it's sort of this whole toughen up, be tough, don't show your emotions. It goes deeper than that. And really, if you read about it, and maybe actually Dr. Yousuf's better to speak to this, but the whole post-World War II idea of individualism, and what's the big fancy word for it? Neoliberalism, neoliberatism, or whatever. You'll explain. But this idea that it's every man for himself, and if you're not as successful as your neighbor, that's on you, and you didn't work hard enough, and you didn't do the right things. And I think that competitive nature is healthy to a degree, no matter what community you're talking about, but men and, masculinity has taken it to the extreme. And so I think it's redefining that, and what it means to be a community is something that men in general have sort of let go of, that women and even the LGBT community have sort of found again. And I think Dr. Yousuf was touching on that with this whole redefining thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Jesse, with what you're saying. And I do think it's a very westernized culture idea, but oftentimes, especially in the workplace, we have been taught to really abuse some of this masculine energy to get ahead, right? I think oftentimes, at least especially in the last 30 years, recently it's changed a little bit when it comes to leadership, et cetera, but there was definitely this idea in the workplace of alone at the top, right? How do I get ahead? And it's kind of this grind. And I think we were taught within the workplace, and women were taught as well, right? This idea of, in order to get ahead, you had to use some of these masculine traits, assertiveness, right? Taking advantage of leadership, taking advantage of power. And I think oftentimes this idea of toxic masculinity, this energy, can not only be abused by men, but I've also seen where women have to feel like they have to fall into this as well, right? Where they have to start abusing those masculine traits in order to get ahead. And sadly, it is this idea of what's happening in westernized culture of, in order to get ahead, that means something else has to be behind you. So it doesn't really have this win-win mentality. It's very, if I win, someone has to lose. And sadly, it can be turning into this idea of toxic masculinity, which is abusing those energies.
And competitive nature too, right? I think competition is a big trend when you talk about masculinity, and sports too. You know, men are very sporty, typically for the most part. And you see sometimes that competitive drive can kind of get the most of us sometimes, right? Or get the better of us, as they say. Tuan, do you have anything to say before we move on to the next topic about toxic masculinity?
No, I actually volunteered Eric to come here because I knew that when Eric speaks, I didn't have to speak that much after that. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're tuning in, yeah, I'm just like an audience as well, pretty much today. No, I mean, okay, all kidding aside, a note about earlier though, about when you said hug it out, you see hug it out. And I love what Eric said in terms of Western ideologies. You know, I grew up in Canada, although I grew up with primarily Latin culture. So even when I speak, once you get to know me, you realize why I speak the way I speak, because most of my friends growing up were Italians, right? But then I believe in my culture. We speak Vietnamese at home primarily, then French, and then English is like every now and then. And what's a challenge is when I meet my fellow sisters in the Asian community, I just want to give them a hug, and they're like, hey, like really not hugging, and for in what I learned, I'm not going to generalize from my experience. Let's put it that way. My experience is that is too friendly as a man, right? Like you have to reserve that level of affection for a woman. So then I start learning about these ideologies, even within my own culture more. And then suddenly other cultures, as we live in a more multicultural community, like Ottawa's has become so much more multicultural. I grew up in Montreal in a very immigrant neighborhood, right? And so it was really just interesting to observe. And even like I said, till this day, even when we were before getting on this call, I said I don't call myself an expert in this space at all. I could tell you my experience, and still to this day, my struggles, my triggers, where I recognize the triggers, but I'm still trying to figure it out, right? And but having lads like you guys in my corner, it feels great to be in a community, which I think is one of the biggest answers, is getting yourself in the right community of men who bring this out in the open, so we could share with each other, so we discuss what we learn from each other and how we grow past certain things like anger and things like that, right? So, or thinking we have to use your ego and masculinity to win and win and win all the time. Why do I always have to win? Why do I have to be right? Why do I always have to fix things, right? Like these are the things that we get triggered. At least I do, and I have to be more aware of it. And it really helps being around fellow brothers who also want to overcome these triggers, right? And so, I believe it's going to be a lifelong journey, but at least it's one where I think I can be an example to my son. And my daughter too, my son and daughters, how it is to face yourself and ask yourself, is this the best version of you, right? And so it's even beyond masculinity. So there you go, my little spiel.
Thank you, Tuan. And what about you, Dr. Yousuf? I really do think, throughout this conversation, it popped up to me that like toxic masculinity and healthy masculinity is not always a black and white thing. It could be a spectrum, right? So at what point does healthy masculinity become toxic masculinity? Because we talk about healthy masculine traits, and now we're talking about, there's certain toxic masculinity traits as well, right? So I just wanted to pose that question to you, Dr. Yousuf.
Sure, yeah. So, this is huge. I gotta wrap my head around the answer to this question. you know, we were talking earlier about defining what is masculinity, and then the redefining of what it is to be a man. And you know, I have a bias in the sense that in the nature of what it is that I do and the way that I interact with people, I look at people as being the individual. And my focus, there's toxic masculinity, but then there's just toxicity. There's just individuals who have an unhealthy relationship with themselves, regardless of their gender, regardless of their sex. And so we talk about toxic masculinity. We look at how someone's expressing themselves, specifically a man, because that's what we're talking about. And we look at, you know, someone, you know, so clinically, I treat a lot of men in my practice, and I see a lot of men, depending on the generation, but I'm going to generalize, but who come in who are detached, right? They're not actually connected to their physical body, to their emotional body. There just seems to be this wall that exists. And as a result of that wall, and as a result of being cut off from their body, out comes these expressions. It could be agitation, be irritation. It could be aggressiveness. It could be, I mean, there's hundreds of diagnoses, but the expression of what they're feeling on the inside is this kind of predetermined aggressive behavior, which is what we classically have defined as being masculine. But I think the missing piece that I think is one of the reasons why men don't seek out help, looking after themselves, is that what isn't being understood is what's actually going on in the inside. So I have men who come in for treatment who have like, I don't know, they come in for digestive related issues, but the reality is it's actually this gnawing anxiety that they feel within them, and then they're expressing that in this aggressive behavior. So I don't know if it's a little bit of a long-winded answer, but toxic masculinity, from my perspective as a naturopathic doctor, it's more individual. It's more has to do with how someone's self-expressing, less so, because you could have a woman coming in or someone who is somewhere identifies differently. You know, I don't know if I answered that question at all.
No, I think you did, and I think it's a very interesting way in which you answered that. And I think that segues into the second question that I wanted to ask, and this one is to Tuan, and it's about stigma. And you know, I love what you mentioned about the wall and being cut off from their body. So like my second question is, you know, Tuan, you've ran DudeBuddha. I introduced it in your introduction. So again, it was an anonymous site, a forum where men can go to, you know, get help about businesses and about their personal life, anonymously. And that's the key thing about this forum. And I learned about this from you, and I've been fascinated since the moment that you kind of told me about it. Why do you think it's so important? Why is it so successful, Tuan, for men to post anonymously about their own mental health? Like, why do you think it's so hard for guys to admit that they may be struggling? And the second part of my question actually surrounds what Dr. Yousuf said about you know, toxicity and anger and aggression, because not all online forums where men congregate are positive. You know, we've heard of congregations of men who gather online to express their frustrations against feminism, you know, just being very violent and just not cool, you know. You know, things like the incel movement, for example. So how do you discourage this behavior on DudeBuddha, and what advice do you have for men? And I know you have a lot of advice for men about dealing with their frustration and their insecurities and their anger. So no, it's a long-winded question. I can repeat any part of that question.
No worries. I'm just waiting for the transcription to come through so I can reread it.
It's coming through back, so don't hold your breath.
For the listeners, the audience, we like to joke around here, if that's okay. It is a serious topic, but yes, I try to take things as lightheartedly as possible. Now, on DudeBuddha, to give you a bit of background, because some people are like, how do you have an anonymous community for men? The long story short is I did a post 6 years ago about coming out of depression when I went through my divorce, and it kind of went viral-ish, you know, and men around the world started reaching out to me saying, dude, man, I feel your struggle. I know how it feels to feel like a failure and how you feel your kids and all that kind of stuff. And so then I started an email list, really just talking with them, and I would post I would post topics where I would invite experts like Dr. Yousuf. By the way, we need to talk. You know, I would bring experts to address different questions that we may face. And the best part was you could just come on as long as you're on the email list, and you never had to show your identity. So it's just, I didn't even think about identity at the time, but then I started joining other communities, and I mentioned earlier that community is so important. And I met Eric through in a dad's community called the Dad Edge community, the Dad Edge Alliance, which I highly recommend dudes check it out, dads. And it's an incredible organization. And but what was interesting was the men in this group are really, they embrace vulnerability. They embrace opening up about everything from erectile dysfunction to being addicted to porn to alcohol to they just open up about everything in this group. What was interesting was I invited a ton of friends to, hey, you got to join this group. And what they were uncomfortable with was they showing their identity. And for them, their reason in terms of not opening up, for some of them at least, they felt they're leaders in their organization, they're leaders in their community, they're leaders in whatever they may be. It's ego driven, it's pride driven, and they just feel that they just can't open up about this. And in my case, because the men in my group are all entrepreneurs, it's definitely related to their brand in their network, right? And so I created it started with as a BB Press, WordPress glorified platform. And I invited these men to join my community, and they can create an identity code, name, whatever they want, doesn't matter. And the line is, we don't care who you are. We just care what you're dealing with. And we just want to support you through that. Right. And through the past 5 years of this, the things that I've seen men open up about, we've seen in the Dead Edge Alliance, except, you know, for every one man that opens up in the DEA, as we call it, there are 1,000 men who would not open up. And so why has it been successful? Turns out that for every one man that's willing to join a public group and be vulnerable, there are at least 1,000 men that would not. And I provide that space for the 1,000 men. And I've learned how men struggle with being judged by their own wives, and it's really not their wives. It's a whole paradigm within their own head, right? It's not about their wife. It's not about anyone, right? And I've seen them struggle because they are having, you know, dirty thoughts in parts of their lives and within their community, where they're like, I feel so ashamed of this. I hate that I have these feelings, and I don't know who to talk to about it. Right. And so it's pretty interesting to see what men would open up to, and imagine everyone, whoever's on the audience right now. Of course, we don't see who you are, but imagine if you had a space, not to like be rude or anything, just to really express what you're feeling deep inside and knowing that you're being heard. Right? Imagine what you would say right now about a pain that you're dealing with, or even a joy. Right. There's guys who used to join the group and they're like, hey, I'm a dad. And I'll be honest, I'm nervous as heck about being a dad. And they would say like they never really had a dad that was there for them. They're afraid of not being able to have a conversation with their own children because they just never connected with their dads. They don't even know what to do, right? And one of the guy joked, and I stole the joke from him, to be honest, ever since. But he says, I remember when I walked out of the hospital with the kid, I looked at my wife and I said, I can't believe they're letting us walk out with a baby. And he was like 23 years old, right? And so like these are the things that men didn't share until they got into my group. Right. So I've seen it all, everything beneath the sun. Just imagine it. It's been said in the group in the most unfiltered way possible, right from their own feelings, the words they want to use without being judged. And you asked, how do we stop men from making rude comments? It's an invite only organization, and you'll discover DudeBuddha because I do this on the side, like 5 hours a week. It's not like a business or anything, right? And so if you happen to get invited to come in, it's likely you've been somewhat, somehow qualified as a decent human being who's just trying to overcome his demons or whatever. And we have gay men in the group too. We have, it doesn't matter. We even have women who identify as a man in the group. Right. So there's no judgment.
I'm not surprised you have gay men. We love anonymous groups full of other men. It's great. You know our people.
Love.
You know what's interesting though is I'm not surprised it's so successful because guys are afraid to open up because there's that stigma, right? Now, because of conversations like this, we're encouraging men to share their feelings and open up more, but there is still a whole other side of it where you're seen as weak and, you know, oh, men don't have that much to complain about. Look at all the other communities that need our help. Quiet down. And I've actually been in groups of women, straight women that say things like if their boyfriend is going through depression or anxiety, they'll be like, oh, I can't stand a whiny man, you know? And I'm sitting there like, this is exactly the problem. So there's toxicity on both sides, but we're going to change it by starting these conversations.
Yeah, definitely. Even like on dating sites, I guess I'm single now, so sometimes I go on a girl's profile and it'll be just like no alpha males only and stuff like that. I'm like, what does that mean, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you brought that up, Tuan, and I just wanted to challenge you with something actually, because you mentioned some of these guys in your group are, you know, leaders in your community, leaders in the community, you know, successful entrepreneurs. And they don't want to open up, they don't want to tarnish their brand or anything like that. But what we're trying to do today is to step out of anonymity, whatever, you know what I'm saying, whatever I'm trying to say. But we're trying to step out of that shadow to be able to speak and be leaders in our community by saying that it's okay to speak up. It's okay. It can be a part of my brand. And in fact, it actually nowadays could be even a positive part of my brand to be able to go out there and to speak openly and bravely about my own mental health, anything that I may be struggling about. Is this something that you would like to push with some of these community leaders and these community engagers in your group?
I won't say push, but what if anyone joins it, there's a part of the, I guess, start here document that says the path of a DudeBuddha. So you're all DudeBuddha is that you start off here because you're just really uncomfortable. It's almost like you can't over orchestrate your kid's life. You can't orchestrate your kid's life at all, to be honest. Right. So, you know, like, so for me, it's letting them know that this is a path that I hope they'll take, which is you start off getting comfortable, having a space you could be heard. And then as you kind of move on forward, you might start saying, you know what, I'm willing to show who I am. And within the group, there are men who change from their code name to their actual name. Men offer their phone numbers. Men offer to be connected live, right? And so to me, the path of the DudeBuddha is, as long as we have the conversation like this, like today, I don't know who's on the call, but there may be a man, or let's say, you know, a person, right, who's now, because of this, says, I'm gonna share what I'm feeling. And you're at a point where you know that when I share vulnerably, I will be met with vulnerability as well. And when that happens, you know, magic happens. It's fun. You feel the power of vulnerability, right? But I don't want to force it upon anyone. You know, there's guys who are like saying, you know, hey, I know my, you know, he's a CEO of a mega corporation, and he wrote, my wife just opened up that he's sleeping with my VP finance, right? So you want me open about this? You know, it's like, and I'm like, dude, hey, you could open it here. You know, here's, you want some, he goes, I need to talk to some lawyers. I want to talk this. I want to talk about this. So we set up anonymous lawyer calls and things like that, just so he could have the information. But eventually, hopefully, when he's comfortable enough to know that this journey was really something that will allow him to become a better version of him when he faces what's happening, all the conversation that's in his head, the anger, frustration, the feeling lack of appreciation, all of that is meant to be faced. And I hope that through this community and other conversations, like, hey, if he's watching right now, you know, whoever he is, you know, hopefully you'll get to that point where we could celebrate that moment where we found out that there was some infidelity happening within our relationship. And it was really just an opportunity for us to figure shit out in our own lives.
It's amazing. And I think it's amazing work that you're doing with DudeBuddha for sure. Other panelists, Dr. Yousuf, Eric, Jesse, just continue on that topic about, you know, men and their insecurities and their anger. Is there anything that you guys could say on that topic, and maybe some tips for some guys, or, you know, some girlfriends, or, you know, partners of guys who may be dealing with problems with, you know, frustration, insecurities, and anger?
I'll say something. You know, one thing, so what's really important, which I'm struggling with, is language. So it's creating language, you know. One of the challenges I had in the beginning of my practice was that, so for example, I'd have like patients booking in and doing their intake forms, which give me background on kind of what's going on in their body, and it's a bunch of questions that we ask. And I would have my male patients coming in, and they kind of struggle with the questionnaire, and you know, I'd often have like lots of blank sheets, lots of empty and like missing information, and it is not language that most men will relate to. And as a result, they kind of get left in the dark. So this whole opportunity for them to express themselves is lost, or to actually, for me to do a full assessment is lost, because I have all these missing pieces. So it's kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is kind of expression, the ability to speak candidly in a language that isn't judged. And I think that that forum is just incredible. It's like an incredible opportunity for a lot of men to actually, without judgment, express what it is that they're feeling and to have the support. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, Yousuf, I love what you're saying when it comes to the language, because I truly think, especially in this space of mental health or self-care or whatever you want to call it, men tend to have a lot of awareness around their feelings, right? Because they do this work. They talk a lot about emotions, they talk a lot about vulnerability. And we forget that that's a learned skill. I have a lot of friends that when I ask them to identify how, something they're feeling, they'll often just say what they're thinking. And they can't even express what they're feeling out loud. Right? They don't even know how to express when they have joy or when they have sadness. They don't even know what that is, because they've been told to be, this idea of masculinity was stoicism, which was don't say anything and be quiet and keep it all in, right? Which is that kind of shadow side of stoicism, which a lot of us probably had grandfathers that were like that, right? Strong and masculine and quiet. But I love what you're saying about language, because I think it's important to create that space, like you're saying, to men to start to learn about what they're feeling. Because one emotion that we're okay with feeling is anger, right? We're always told it's totally cool as a man to feel anger, but otherwise we don't really know what emotions to feel. So when I started this journey, I didn't really know what anxiety was. I didn't even know what, am I sad? Am I mad? Am I angry? Like, I don't know. So this idea of labeling and using this type of language in a space where you can start to figure that out is very important, to have that safe space for men to talk about it.
I think I just want to add to that, Eric, which is not only learn it, but then realize it's okay to feel it, because I'm even guilty of, if I'm feeling anxious or depressed or upset about something, I dismiss my own feelings because I'm a white, privileged, semi sort of successful person. And it's like, I have no right to feel these things, but we all do. And I think men especially are told all the time, it's not valid. Like I was saying earlier, there's other people that have bigger problems than you, just shut up and be stoic. And that's not the way we should be.
Anybody want to expand on that validity of, men actually having the right, to have mental health problems, or to be able to talk about their mental health problems? Because I know that it's not just the masculinity, it's not just a being a man sucking it up kind of thing. But again, when you talk about things like privilege, sometimes we may feel inclined not to talk about our problems, or not to post about our problems. And on all the advocacy that I do and all the posts that I do on Facebook, a lot of the times I do get pulled aside and have those messages too, saying, why are you doing all this help for men? They don't really need help. So I just wonder if any of you guys actually experience the same things in your advocacy.
I think this is such an important point, for an array of reasons. And, in the sense that men are being, it's super controversial. So I have these conversations with my sisters, and I get totally slammed. I used to get slammed. Now I'm not getting slammed as much as I used to. But, I mentioned before that that men are now being silenced. If you're a Caucasian, a white, heterosexual male, for you to voice your opinion is a bad thing now. So there's this whole censorship that's happening, this quieting down. And so, which I think there's nothing positive that can come from that at all. Actually, only negative, because it branches off into a bunch of other topics, like, not going to kind of open Pandora's box, but into, chronic pornography viewing, into gaming, into, lack of attachment to other people, distorted relationship, desires and whatever, not distorted, but anyways, I kind of lost my thought because it kind of went in 1,000 different directions.
And he's like, I'm not going to open Pandora's box, and then he opens it.
And then it's like, boom, 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 boom. So, because I mean, I'm really passionate about this because I find that you know, the more guys that I talk to, the more that I hear that there's just this silencing that's happened, you know, and I kind of so here's a story. So the school that I went to, so the industry that I'm in as a naturopathic doctor, there's in my class there's 140 students, 10 of which were men, and there was Men's Health Week. And so I boycotted this. Actually, I gave a speech before this happened. But what the guys, my fellow students, decided to do was to do a beauty pageant where all these guys worked out, like they're all like doing, anyways, work, so their muscles were all bulgy, and they went and they like paraded themselves in front of all these screaming women. And I'm like, wow, if the roles were reversed today, and this was, I don't know, like an engineering department, and it was men doing that to women, this would be all over the media. But here are these guys in this complete shift who are, you know, my younger sister calls it peacocking. They're like peacocking themselves around to get attention. And it was just kind of this moment where I thought, wow, is this kind of, you know, when we look at dominant culture and the flip and the role and how everything shifts and pendulum. So I don't know, it's interesting. I think it's fascinating.
Well, that could be a part of your redefining masculinity thing that you were talking about earlier too, right?
Exactly, right? So what is masculinity, right? Like I consider myself, you know, a relatively masculine guy, but you put me next to some football, rugby playing guy, I'm going to seem like some effeminate guy, right? I don't know, like what is masculinity? I think it's still an open discussion because we haven't actually answered that question.
Yeah, I was going to share, you know, and Tuan, I'll let you have your space, man. But I just find we are in this very critical culture, right? For the first time ever, we have so many ways to express ourselves, right? Through online forums, in person, over the phone, by text message, on Facebook forums, etc. And it allows for a lot of criticism. And it's to the point where, like we're saying, you know, we're to the point where we are criticizing our own emotions, our own gifts, our own ways that we're sharing. And there's this constant self-judgment. Is this shame that I'm feeling valid enough to ask for help? You know what I mean? And this happens all over the spectrum, like we're talking about. You know, and I love what you shared, Yousuf, and just going back to the idea of critical culture, right? Like for one side of the equation, this fashion show that men were putting on, these men might have felt very empowered. And to another sense, and maybe a different perspective based on how you were brought up, these men were completely objectified. And I think it's very important to ask the question, what were these men feeling? Because that is what is the most important, right? It's easy to give an opinion not being on that stage. But really the perspective needs to be, what were the men feeling? Because if they felt empowered, well, great on that, right?
I think that's a completely valid question. I would say empowerment. So this is going to be controversial, but empowerment would be just walking out in your natural body state, and rather than like hitting the gym for a month before this big fashion show so that you've got like bulgy muscles, and you're just showing your body in its like standard state, right? You're not enhancing it. So if they kind of walked on stage and said, this is me, this is my body, I love my body, I'd say, yeah, that's an empowered state, that's great. But what ended up happening with most of them is they all hit the gym about a month before so that they became more, I don't know, masculine.
Hey, Yousuf, are you saying that I shouldn't have done 200 push-ups and bought a shirt 3 sizes too small for this call? Is that what you're trying to say?
I'm saying I'm happy you're doing you.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.
But that's an important thing to say, because for some of the guys, maybe working out is them doing them, and it makes them feel good and their mental health. Like that's a whole other discussion, right? But that's why it's controversial.
Let me just preface. So working out, lifting weights is excellent for your health. I support it full. Like I'm not debating workout culture and exercising. As a big proponent of my lifestyle and what I preach and the nature of what it is that I do. But modifying it to enhance yourself for a fashion show is a little bit different.
Interesting take for sure. So which leads me to my next question. Actually, my next question actually just is about men's health itself. And I know you work in the field. So Dr. Siddiqui, my question, this one's for you. So back to you. In your work with health and sex therapy, again, we've discussed this earlier. Men have traditionally neglected their overall health by not asking for help. The stats have shown that 33% or men are less likely, 33%, to go see a doctor even if they're not feeling well. Compared to a woman. So in particular, as you know very well, men's sexual health in particular is something that men are even more secretive about in your work. So what can you say about, this health trend of men not seeking help, not just for their mental health, but for their physical health as well? And one of our audience members asked before this panel, how is mental health unwellness manifested in men? And, with your naturopathic background, maybe explain the holistic approach and aspect behind that.
Yeah. So it's a huge. I keep saying that it's a huge answer. It's complicated, and it's. I think if I take a step back and I look at generations, I can see in my practice there's an evolution that's definitely happening. So I have male patients in their 60s, 70s who come in when their bodies now betrayed them. So they're all of a sudden on a bunch of, they're on cardiovascular meds, Lipitor, cholesterol. They're probably taking Cialis every other day so that they can maintain an erection. And things have just progressed too far and they're there for help because they're scared. So that's older generation. Then I'd say men in their 40s to 50s. So typically come in now when they're either there for health optimization or they're there because their spouses pulled them in. That's typically what happens. So you're high performing individuals who want to maintain themselves and I help them to maintain themselves, or again, spouses pulled them in. What's super interesting, very, very interesting, is men in their 30s will come in and they're proactively looking after their health. They're like, I'm noticing that my energy isn't that great anymore. They have an emotional awareness, a connection into their body. I realize that I'm getting bloated and I'm kind of slowing down and I'm not feeling attractive. And it's a very different dialogue. And then I'll have men in their 20s. And this was super fascinating. Men that come in and they come in and they want to talk primarily about their emotions, something we've always associated as something women do, right? That I hate the word, but the feminine side, right? But they come in, they talk about their emotions first and then their body, where men many generations older will talk about their body and completely ignore. So there's a definite shift that seems to happen. And then not only that, I'm noticing that men who are 20, 30 and somewhat in their 40s are starting to look after. I can see that we're starting to get a lot better at asking questions about our health, which is something that men who are older have really struggled with. And I think that the big part of that is how we define men and everything that we've talked about earlier. It's really interesting and to see in my practice. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yeah, but what do you attribute that to then, that phenomenon?
I think that there's so I think that it's redefining masculinity. So as we define what is masculinity and we kind of juggle with different concepts and ideas, and it's that what the notion that a man is supposed to be strong and never weak doesn't really exist anymore. I think it doesn't exist. It still exists, but less so. And I think men are just more connected into their bodies, more and want more for themselves. And there's I think access to information is huge too. I think outreach, like what we're doing today, what all of the panelists are doing, is helping to educate men to start understanding that, as you mentioned earlier, pretty much across the board in terms of any negative health outcome, men are at a higher risk. And hopefully we'll change that with all of this advocacy work that we're working on.
Well, that'd be great if all the work that we're doing with masculinity is really getting men to go, go to the doctor and, take care of their holistic health. But is this just the men that you're seeing? Because like I said, 33% less likely to go see a doctor. So is it just the current patients that are existently going to see the doctors that are now being more holistically open with their health? Or is it more men in general? I don't know if you take survey results to see if these are new clients or clients who haven't seen a medical professional within the last 5-10 years or so, or anything like that.
So a lot of patients who come to see me will look at me as being their primary care provider. So I would be the equivalent to their family doctor. And so I'd say like a fairly large percentage consider me in that role. So a lot of them have family doctors, but a lot of them aren't quite engaged with that process. I mean, the nature of what I do is very different than what you will get from your family GP. I spend more time with my patients. I spend an hour. I look at their body comprehensively. I'm not just looking at, like, one of my pet peeves is that not a lot, but enough men come in thinking that it's just testosterone. I think we talked about this when we all were hanging out before, where I'm like, you know what, guys, you're more than just your testosterone. If I do any like educational outreach and I talk about this is how you're going to build your testosterone, my viewership for men goes through the roof. If I talk about mental health and anxiety, it's only women that look at it. If I talk about digestion, I'll get men and women equally. But the moment that I say testosterone, I get tons of engagement. What's really interesting, so we look at it from like a business perspective, is that we look at retention, right? So if I'm marketing, how many people are actually going to book in? It's unfortunately the business of life. And men will read and look for free information online, tons of information, qualified, whatever, but they don't actually engage. They will look quietly. So for example, I did like a Facebook interview with an erectile dysfunction clinic in Ottawa about 2 weeks ago. And we like put it through Facebook Live and we boosted it. And the number of views was high. It wasn't as high as they normally are, but it was high. The amount of like likes and shares was like 0. But the number of people who watched the full video was higher than any other video that we've done. And it was I think 60 or 70% men, which never happens. So that's how it gives us a lot of information, right? So guys want information, but as you had mentioned earlier, they're still struggling to engage.
Very interesting, for sure. Eric, you mentioned a couple of things about older generation learning from younger generation. So you are a coach. So maybe can you talk to us about the perspective that you've received maybe from some of your clients that you deal with?
Yeah, I think right now, a lot of the clients that I'm talking to, a lot of the men just in general that I'm speaking with, they're struggling with identity when it comes to what it looks like to lead their families, especially, because I deal with a lot of fathers, but especially to them, breaking that cycle of the generation, right? Of trying not to give some of the views that their fathers gave them to their children. So we're seeing this major shift right now, right? Where men are starting to become more aware of their presence in the home. We went from, over the last 30 years, women coming out of the home fully into the workforce, to that dynamic playing out in a strong way, to now men who, a lot of these, amazing women are taking these positions, rightfully so. And so men are starting to wonder, what is my position now, right? My identity as a breadwinner is now threatened, right? So what value do I have now if my wife can just essentially live without me? And how this shows up oftentimes with the men that I speak to is they actually recede into a very passive role, not only as maybe a breadwinner or doing things around the house, but also as a father. Because, in my home, there's no doubt my wife is a way better parent than I am when it comes to dealing with the kids. She's amazing. She's also a school teacher, right? So that's one of her superpowers. And I remember when my kids were born, it was extremely threatening to me to go and deal with my kids, because I didn't think that I could really do it as well as she could, right? So I was trying to stay in my own domain. But what I realized is that I had everything within me to be this strong fatherly presence, and that my kids needed that. And my wife needed that. So I think what's happening is there's definitely a struggle of identity as this kind of generation is shifting, certainly into fatherhood, but even just into becoming men, right? Our boys becoming men are really struggling with, what is my role? Because we were raised in homes where this was your specific role, the provider, the strength, the caretaker. And what we're realizing, the way that we've defined, especially Western culture, is the man's role is no longer defined by that. Because my wife can totally survive on her own when it comes to those aspects. But my wife still needs me in a lot of different ways, which is those healthy masculine traits, right? I'll tell you a story. It's very funny. We were laughing the other day. My wife and I, we were on a date, and we were walking, and it was a little bit dark down this path. And I just kind of naturally went towards that darkness. I was like, oh, and my wife kind of like, oh, is that where we're going? And I was like, yeah, like what? This is like the path. It follows down here. And she was kind of like, well, there's no street lights. Like, that's not usually where I walk. And I had to like make a shift of like, wow, I never even thought about that from your perspective. Because for me, I don't feel threatened going down. I'll defend myself. And then we had that great dynamic of the conversation of my wife is like, is it weird that like if somebody jumped out, I would expect you to do something? And it kind of created this amazing conversation around expectation of men and women and how there is still an undercurrent of that, even though we continue to ignore it. My wife looks for me for strength, for stability, for safety, as I look to her for caretaking. But because we've kind of, we've lost this identity of who we are as men and women, it just gets jumbled. So what happens? Men are lost. Men are totally lost in what their role is in the home, as fathers, as sons, as friends. We don't know how to act. And that's where this whole redefining of that masculine trait is coming, right? That's why men need to band together to start talking about that, which is really important. Hey, what does masculinity look like to you? How are you showing up as a father? How are you showing up as a brother, as a friend, as a boyfriend, et cetera, et cetera. So I really think that we need to start, helping each other out with redefining that.
Yeah, I think we're all just trying to figure it out at this point, right? What are the roles? Are there even roles? Do they even exist? And you said that, the expectation that like, if someone jumped out of the bush, you'd be expected to, defend yourself, defend your family and stuff like that. On the flip side, however, I think sometimes like these expectations can cause a little bit of pressure for men, right? And for example, being the breadwinner, earning money, there's the COVID-19 pandemic right now. A lot of people are losing their jobs. A lot of men are losing their jobs. They're no longer able to provide for their families. How are they going to be able to handle the pressure of losing their income? And Tuan, maybe I'll ask you this because, you have a big network of entrepreneurs. We all know right now, business owners are suffering. A lot of them are losing their jobs. A lot of them are having to adapt or die, really. So how are some of these men kind of dealing with that and dealing with their expectations on having to be like providers for their family and things like that?
I mean, some of them are trying to deal it with a traditional way, beating themselves down, telling themselves they're a failure. Some of the men are opening up. I think that I see both on a daily basis. We're talking about redefining masculinity and all this, and a part of me thinks I just want to destroy the term masculinity. And the reason I'm saying this is, so I'm going to throw a whole different perspective here, and comes as a father, right, and raising my children, and there's a lot of approaches, and I'll give you one approach that I've seen. For example, what's your family legacy, right? Well, this is what was passed down to me, but I want to redefine what I want to pass on to future generations. So this is my family legacy. This is what it's going to be. This is my family mission. This is my family's mission statement. This is, to me, like, it's something I don't believe in personally, because I don't believe in creating a box for anyone. I don't believe that. I believe that the way we want to raise our kids and ourselves is, and so with men, my work with men, if you want to call that, that's why I don't call myself a guru in this, but, I've been fortunate to run a whole bunch of surveys with my dudes, and I could share a few because Dr. Yousuf, I have one around sex and men's health too, that I would love to share with you to get your thoughts, because it's only 300 men at that time, but it was astonishing results, right? But back to the whole, my approach is that in our family, we have these three statements. They're like, oh, who's our family? What, I don't believe in legacy. I believe in just living your best and then let legacy decide what it's going to be, right? I don't plan out my legacy at all. And I feel like whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And in our family, we say, you want to discover yourself? learn yourself, like learn self. So discover self, learn self, celebrate self. And that's to me empowerment right there. Is I don't give a crap whether you consider yourself a protector, whatever, any of that stuff, because where we're moving is so amazing. It's so dynamic. So what it requires is for you to know who you are and have an open communication in a non-judgmental way and just agree on how to solve problems. And if problems come up, we just got to figure out how to solve it. Or if we say, hey, I'm going to walk down the street. Hey, you're the one with the black belt in Taekwondo. If someone jumps out, do you mind if you take care of that person? I'm like, yeah, sure, babe. But can you use that spray first to see if we could spray that person so we could run the other direction? That way I don't have to Taekwondo his ass. Like, how about that? So like having that kind of communication to me is what's key. So in our family, we don't talk about a vision, a legacy. We talk about the right habits, the right way to think. And we want to have open, non-judgmental, so call it values, even if you want to call it. But we're trying to encourage this. And to me, the only way to encourage is if you do your best to embody yourself. So when I talk to my fellow dudes, let's say, I just ask them the questions like, so what's not working for you? What are you doing? What are you not proud of right now? If you had to flip the switch, what would make you proud of who you are? Right. And you talk about that fashion show earlier. Eric brought up exactly what I was going to ask, make a kind of more as a joke, which is like, yeah, it's funny. These guys are prancing down, working out, but what are they really feeling? Like, are they doing as conformists? Are they doing because they want to show off because they know that it's part of their masculine upbringing? Like, there's such a dynamic array of feelings that men have doing this, right? In the business world, I call it hiding behind the hustle, which is what I used to do. I was a successful entrepreneur, so I didn't have to tell people I felt insecure in 1,000 areas of my life. I just had to say, I'm freaking rich and I'm loaded and I'll help every charity in the world. Right there you go, but no one knew that as I did more for other people, I felt more and more insecure, because I felt people want to get to know me and I just want to push them away. And I pushed them away by putting a business in front of them and saying that I'll support them financially. Right. And doing good in the community. Right. So my opinion to all this right now, as men are facing challenges, is I would ask them questions, and I'll tell you, like, I learned how to ask questions through Eric, right? Like, I'm not very good at asking questions, that's going to create, really interesting conversations and bring out story, really, right? And but I'm learning every day. Last 5 years, I never knew the power of question the way what I've learned the last 5 years. And so that's my approach. And if anyone is facing a challenge or you're supporting someone, it's learning to ask really, really powerful questions to get them to connect with themselves and open up with a story. Because inside that story is where you can shift, right? It's that story that you can shift, help them shift. And the last point is don't try to rush it, right? And I say this from a parent, right? Is like so many of us want to orchestrate and say, you know what? I feel my dad coming out of me with this anger, and I want to make sure my kid doesn't get it, and you just want you badly so want to not pass it down to your future generation. But I think you got to take it easy on yourself. You got to be compassionate. You recognize it, right? And forgive yourself and say sorry to your kids. Tommy Morgan asked earlier about a tactic when triggers happen. One of the things I do is I apologize to my kids. Like, I love apologizing to my kids. I let them know, like, yo, dad screwed up there. I'm sorry. But I don't say, because my dad, which his dad and his dad, his dad, his dad, that's where it's coming from, yo. It's like, instead of that, I just want to say, moving forward, like, daddy, I'm so sorry. Daddy felt scared. Daddy felt this. We're going to do this together. Right. And so that's what I try to do. I still screw up, but I try my best to not overly force it. And a tactic I use is the power of apology and the power of moving forward together. Right. Openly, non-judgmentally.
Amazing insights, Tuan. Thanks for sharing. Jesse, I wanted to ask you, like, we're just gonna backtrack a little bit back to like kind of gender roles, and the last question was kind of about that too. But and this is gonna sound super ignorant, but like, how can you comment on how gender roles kind of play out in a gay relationship or some of the relationships that you've had in your past?
Well, I mean, before I talk about that, I just wanted to say what Eric was and Tuan was highlighting, that we can choose our own roles now, whether gay, straight, whatever. We no longer have to fit in this definition of straight masculinity. So it's amazing that guys are finally realizing that. And part of that is sexuality. You know, just because you have a homosexual experience doesn't mean you're gay all of a sudden. If I sleep with a woman one time, I'm still gay, sweetheart. Sorry to break your heart. So it's like this idea that labels are not absolute. And an interesting story is my little brother is 22, and he's like textbook definition of a straight guy. Everything's red and black plaid, like huge beard, lumberjack type. And he was telling me that some of his peers don't choose a sexuality anymore. Like they don't label themselves not gay, straight, pansexual. I think it's because it's easier to like just, you know, get it sucked by anybody if you don't pick a side. But he says it's because they genuinely want to get to know somebody before deciding what their orientation is. And even to me as a gay man, that's like a mind-blowing concept, because at his age, there was no way in high school, no, I'm not gay. No, I'm not gay. I'm straight. Like I wouldn't even just deny it. I would lie to go to the totally other direction. So that gives me a lot of hope for the future of men, that things are finally changing if guys that are 22 have that attitude towards sexuality. Not all of them, but it's starting. As for gender roles in a relationship, I don't know. I was always the girl.
So, but it was decided on it, I guess, at a point. Or how did that play out?
Well, funny enough, actually, no, like, it's funny. Like I found I had a very long-term relationship. I was in a relationship for 14 years. So we had very mixed gender roles. Like, you know, the traditional male, female, they were really intertwined. Like he cooked, I would walk the dogs, you know, he'd vacuum, I would clean the bathroom. So this is why gays are just happier. We cooperate.
I think if I could add something, that I think with the interesting thing about same-sex relationships is that there's no paradigm that they need that to fall into, right? There's more of a fluidity in terms of roles. It isn't, in my opinion, it's not necessarily about male, female roles. It's just you are who you are. And I think there's a whole movement that happened with like the mainstreaming of homosexual, or I shouldn't say that, same-sex relationships, and the empowerment that comes from owning your identity, who you are, and not being boxed into a certain gender expression. And I think there's a lot of power that actually comes from that. Similar to what was said earlier, it's like, so my politics in my personal belief system is that I'm actually an anti-label guy. You know, I have, I just don't believe that anyone should have any type of a box or any type of a label placed onto them. I think that how we identify, how we express ourselves, it's not, it's like my core belief is that it's changes. Like I express myself differently today than I did 10 years ago. I feel like I'm an evolved person. And when I look back to myself, I'm still the same person, but I'm evolved. And so if I somehow put myself into some sort of a box and say, this is who I am, I then lose that ability to gain an understanding of who I am and to move into a more authentic version of myself.
And I just want to jump on and say, like, before, when I said I was the girl, it was a joke, because it's one of the most ignorant things you can ask a gay couple is who's the guy and who's the girl, because if that were the case, we'd be in a straight relationship. The thing is, when people say that, they don't mean it maliciously. It's just genuine ignorance that they're not, you know, they're not in a gay relationship, so they don't know that you're not supposed to say that. But it just comes back to those reinforced gender roles that are in mainstream society, that people just think that way.
And just to add to that, it's totally offensive, because essentially what they're asking is who's the top and who's the bottom, and what you do in your bedroom is absolutely none of their business. That'd be like you turning around and saying, do you give good whatever?
Yeah.
Just put a filter on. Right?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's great what you guys both mentioned, and you know, not having that pressure of having to figure out the gender roles, or having that awkward discussion between you, and really just being two individuals, and you know, in fluidity and just trying to figure it out. I think that's really beautiful.
Well, and it's not just the gays. Like, I mean, we all know straight couples where the woman is very clearly the man in the relationship, and you know, so it's like it goes across the board. Gender roles need to go.
All right, just
Can I ask
go ahead.
Acie, I just want to ask a quick question for the group based around this, because I'd love your thoughts on it. I think we use a lot of these labels typically to create safety and belonging, right, in our society. So it's very important to us as individuals, as human beings, for our survival, to know where we stand, which is essentially why we're using labels, right? Why we're so obsessed with them. Do you think that getting away from this idea of labeling is creating a lot of distortion and getting away from that idea of, the tribe or belonging, which is inherently what we want to do as humans? And do you think that is associating itself to a lot of the loneliness people are feeling as individuals? As in this idea, a lot of times authenticity comes up, belonging, right? I feel lonely, I feel alone. And I'm wondering if those two things, right, this idea to really not label and not identify, has anything to do with the fact that people really don't know where they belong and where they can fit in with others. Because there's this natural idea as humans to belong to a tribe. It's how we've survived for millions of years. So I'd love your thoughts on that. And if I'm way off in the deep end, feel free to tell me that too.
No, I can provide an opinion. I love it, Dr. Yousuf, when you said I'm an anti-label guy. I'm kind of an anti-label guy. I'm an you got potential person. I hate it when someone says you got potential. That's like a box around that person, right? But there's this book called No Logo way back in the day. Anyone heard of it? No Logo? So it was anti-capitalism, commercialism, all that kind of stuff, anti-brands, right? But the interesting thing was the person who wrote it didn't want to become a logo herself, but people start plastering, I'm the believer of no logo also, and no logo became a logo, right? And so I think the phenomenon now, it's changed a lot because of our technology. Like Eric, you said, communication is like all over the place. And I can go out there saying, I don't believe in labels. Today Tuan is this. Today my son says he's this. Today my daughter says she's this. That's how we are today. Guess what? In about a matter of months, there'll be people who will surround themselves with each other and form that community around that value system, right? And I think that's the beauty in a way of where we are today. In fact, it's why I love things like YouTube, right? As something I like to study. But I love that social media these days, as bad it is for many reasons, what I do love is if you do have a bit of a following, and more so these days, you shine who you are, and the people will come to you. The people who you resonate with, who share your values, and there's your tribe. Give it a name if you want. Like I call my tribe the DudeBuddhas, right? But the DudeBuddhas, I always give it the opportunity to evolve. I say, hey, DudeBuddha, today we're this, but tomorrow we might be a tribe of grandfathers with a lot of regrets. Like who knows, right? Like, so I do believe that being anti-label is really another saying, just let me express who I am. Let me be me. Let me celebrate me. Don't judge me. I won't judge you. And if we feel aligned, let's rock it. Let's dance. Right. So
maybe it's more like an anti-forced label, because we don't want to have labels imposed on us. We want to choose our own labels. And the gay done that for so long. Like there's all those subsets. I don't know how much straight boys know, but there's like bears, twinks, there's all kinds of names that we've chosen for ourselves when we want to identify as a certain label. So it's all about having the right to choose where you belong and not having society tell you where that is.
Yeah, I think if you want to label yourself something, you should have the capacity to do that. So for example, this is kind of was an eye-opening story for me. So I'm fairly new. I've been in Ottawa now 3 years. I'm from Toronto, and I was out, and someone with some friends and whatever, and someone called me brown, and no one in my life has ever called me brown before. And so when they called me brown, I was like, I'm not brown, I'm mixed race. Because I don't identify by the color of my skin. I identify by the fact that my mom's Canadian and my dad's Indo-Pakistani. And I'm a mixed race Canadian born kid. If you call me brown, you're putting me into a certain box that I'm actually not even part of. I'm very much a mixed race kid, half Muslim, half Catholic. And so it's just this really interesting kind of moment that I had where I'm like, right, it's all about self-expression and how you identify for yourself. So it was a big moment for me, actually.
Eric, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I just love the conversation around it.
It was a really philosophical question for sure. To me, like I thought really deeply about it, and I'm all about connection. I'm all about people finding their tribe, whether that's like joining around a sports team, a language, anything in particular that people can join community together for. And I'm a big advocate for getting out there and just finding your tribe. It took me a while to find my tribe when I first moved here out to Ottawa, but so grateful for the people that I've met who shared interests with me. So for me, I think that that's something that's really important for people, is to get out there and make those connections with people, which is often sometimes hard for men.
Dr. Yousuf was gonna make a joke that you said Toronto, not Toronto. Like most Toronto people say Toronto, no? Like, right?
Yeah, but this is I gotta sound professional. It's a panel, right?
I don't want to label you.
Toronto.
Catch me on the block. I'll speak a lot differently. That's for sure. But okay, so just moving on before we get to our Q&A session, I wanted to get into a talk about fatherhood actually, and I want to direct this to the fathers of the group, Eric and Tuan, and there's Quinn right there. So Eric, as a fellow dad, and Tuan as well, I love what you guys are doing with fathers, and just quite simply, take as much time as you guys need. But what is the importance of being a good dad? Why does the world need more good dads? And because for me, I think that your relationship with your father, or a man's relationship with his father, and shout out to my dad if he's on the call. I sent him the invite, so very grateful if he is. But to me, that's your first hero, your first role model for a lot of men, and everything that your father has done for you and everything that your father hasn't done for you has a profound effect in the rest of your life, in my opinion. So I'm just wondering what your guys' thoughts on fatherhood was.
Eric, I'll let you start because I was talking to my son like through 80% of that part. So.
Tuan, you need me to repeat the question for you?
It's still transcribing.
See, he was being a good dad. He was listening to his son, not Acie.
True.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's a really powerful, and I appreciate you asking it. For me, in the next earn their mother's love, right? That bond is very different than the bond that a child has from their father, right? It's childbearing, there's no question of that connection. And I think oftentimes kids, as they're raised, there is always a question in their mind when it comes to whether or not they are fully accepted and loved by their fathers. And I think, as generation goes, the same way that I have a father wound, it's possible that my son will have his own father wound. And we don't always know how to heal that wound. And sadly, oftentimes it can go from generation to generation to generation. And a lot of times in the men that I talk to, right, we talk about this idea of breaking the cycle, right? There's an opportunity here to do something different and create awareness around how am I present for my son and my daughter? And I think this idea of reaffirming love to them and showing up for the big things is very important. And a couple of years ago, I really had to come to terms with what my priority was. And I think it happens naturally in every man when they're in their 30s and they become fathers, right? Life kind of shifts a little bit from, there's this idea, and in the self-care space, this idea, the difference between prince energy and king energy. And oftentimes what happens is men, they evolve from prince to king. And it takes a long time, right? We've seen princes. They're gallivanting, they're doing what they want. They don't really have a kingdom. They don't answer to anybody. And I think oftentimes men are still in that stage when they become fathers. And I think it's really important for men to surround themselves with other elders in order to move into that idea of kinghood. Because in order to be a healthy father, you have to be a king of your domain, right? And that's where I think about servant leadership. It's my responsibility to create a space for my son and my daughter to live their own story, right? That is what a king does. He allows people in his kingdom to be them. But oftentimes you have what's called this idea of the shadow king, right? It's very different than the benevolent king. And the shadow king has expectations for his kids and uses his kids to define himself, right? So this idea of my kid is very polite when we go to church means that I'm a very good father. And we often use our children as a way to express ourselves to the world. And I think we're doing our kids a disservice. So I think it's really, really important to start thinking about servant leadership and this idea of moving into that king energy of, how do I help the people in my kingdom, my wife, my kids, my family members, all, my mom, my dad, etc., and really help them live their true story. And I think that is, to me, at least, what healthy masculinity looks like, in my opinion. So I think the father role is very important. And I think, Tuan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well, because I know sometimes we differ a little bit on things. But I do honestly think that the father role is just as important as the mother role. And it's time for men to kind of step into that power, because we have it in us to be good fathers. And I think we are often our own worst enemy, because we're afraid to fail. We're afraid to screw up in the way that maybe we saw our fathers.
Yo, yo, yo. Yeah, no, I love your share, Eric, as always. For me, fatherhood is the role of fatherhood. Funny is, I don't know if it's different, but I think we actually kind of see it similar. But my kids are basically a mirror for me to look at myself, and my dad is also a mirror for me to look at myself. I could say I had to change my dialogue around my own father. He grew up, and I used to describe him as very depressed, very sad. I don't think he felt he provided for his family, and then he died early, right? So I used to say, I could always tell my dad was depressed. But then only maybe 2-3 years ago, I was able to see a different light, and it's because someone described me a certain way, and I thought, wow, that's my dad. And my dad was gifted with empathy. And I believe that he had so much pain that when someone's in so much pain, they have great empathy. And so I think of my dad now, and my dialogue is, wow, that guy is the most empathetic man I've ever met. And I think it bred into who I am. And then with my son, and my kids here, they drive me crazy, man. It's like crazy, trigger me left, right, and center. And for me, it's going to trigger things that was either bred into me from before, or through my own traumatic or whatever experience or non-traumatic experiences. But I show up for fatherhood, in my opinion, is I just want to make sure I don't let things affect how I treat my kids, how I want to treat my kids. I try to let those things that I give, I try to take the power back to me. I guess that's a more of a, I guess that's a popular expression, which I kind of really, that resonates with me, is I want to make sure that when my kids say something or do something, that I'm going to lose my stuff on them, or I'm going to say something that's going to shame them, or be physically more powerful than them. I have to just remind myself that I shouldn't be like that. That's not who I want to be. Right. And what all I can hope is that what they see is someone who's really trying their best to be the best dad to them as possible. I actually asked my son, in fact, if he was here again, I asked him, how would you describe daddy? And he actually says he's a very kind man. That's what he said a couple days ago. Right. And, I was emotional when he said it. And what else can I ask for? Right. And all I could say, and I love, I have this mug here somewhere, and it says, action speaks louder than words. I just do my best to make sure I address my demons, and show up the way I truly want to show up, the way it truly feels right. And all I hope is my kids are going to learn from that and take the habits, the approach, and apply it when they face their demons, because I have no idea what they're facing, and I don't think I ever will know. Right. So fatherhood is very important. It's really a mirror for you to be a better version of yourself. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with the kids. Right. So anyways, that's my approach.
That's great, Tuan. And it sounds like you're a great father to all 7 of the children that you're raising right now. So that's great. No, and thank you, Eric, as well. I think what you mentioned about, from princehood to kinghood, that really resonated with me, because I really feel like I was princing a little too hard when my son was born a couple of years back, and it led to the long winding road that kind of led me to where I am today. So thank you guys for that. So we're just a bit over 7:30 now, guys. So I think that's going to conclude the panel session, or the panel portion of our discussion. And what a great job you guys all did. So I want to commend you guys on sharing so openly. But we're going to get to the Q&A session now, and there's a lot of very interesting questions, and there's a lot of them. So I'm going to try to get through as many of them as possible. And we'll keep that in mind when we try to go through the questions. So we'll try to keep them brief, but also very powerful at the same time, as you guys have been doing. So just regular protocol. One of the questions I received was actually before the panel, and Dr. Yousuf kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but what are your guys' thoughts on emerging environmental factors that are damaging to men? So things like smartphones, overworking, internet pornography. And anybody can go ahead, and we're going to go do this rapid fire style.
I can go first. We know that testosterone levels in men today are much lower than they were in previous generations. We know that men are experiencing anxiety at higher rates today than they were before as well. We know that cardiovascular disease, all the other things that we had talked about earlier. Environmental, from an exposure, we can look at, our drinking water contains xenoestrogens, which will decrease testosterone. That's due to birth control use found in birth control byproducts found in our water. I don't know. I can go on and on and on. Environmental medicine plays a key role in terms of like lower testosterone. Low testosterone can lead to feelings of depression, low motivation, low libido, and a decrease in muscle mass.
So are these things, guys, and this question goes to everybody, are these kind of things that guys should be avoiding?
I'll say that for me, so I've been sober for about 2 years with alcohol, and I think a lot of it has to do with your relationship with these things. I think it's very important not to shame people when it comes to uses of this kind of stuff, right? Everybody has their own journey. And I think it's important to create awareness around whether or not it's healthy, right? I know men, fathers, who use playing video games to just kind of chill out for a bit. They use it a couple hours a week, and that's what they do. And they need that in order to show up as healthier men. And I think it's very, very important to, number one, not shame people who are doing this based on your own opinions, right? Your own insights. And also try to understand where are these habits coming from, right? I think if somebody is playing video games for 10 hours a day consistently, definitely have that conversation around, hey, what is it that you're feeling? What is the enjoyment you're getting out of this, et cetera? And try to, again, like Tuan said, right, ask those strong questions to get more insightful. But this idea of categorizing things as good or bad, I think it's more important to understand what is your relationship with these things. And when it came to alcohol, for me, I realized that I could not have a healthy relationship with alcohol. But people that are like, I got to quit drinking, a lot of it is like, why? Because you get drunk, once a month and you go overboard. Maybe it's during that time you need to really think about your way you're drinking instead of just cutting it all out. So I think it's really important to try to navigate our relationship with these things.
Mm-hmm.
Really good point.
Tuan, Jesse, anything you'd like to say in that question?
Zippo here.
I'm interested in the answers, because those are some of the things I wonder myself, how these things are affecting me and my life, and tough out here in a pandemic.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were encouraged to watch Social Dilemma on Netflix, in terms of social media and games and all that. I'm a tech guy, so I really find there's a lot of responsibility that tech entrepreneurs need to take, and from that perspective, I just see how manipulative it can be. I talk about, you want to share what your views are and connect with like-minded people. Well, that's the problem too. Social media catches that algorithm, and they'll feed you exactly what you want, and you're never going to learn a different perspective. You're never going to be able to accept a different perspective, right? And so anxiety hits, and judgment and expectation, all that kind of stuff, right? So, our family, we heavily limit screen time and social media, but we open up the dialogue around that, right? So I think that's what's important. So men who are, I love all the stats, by the way, Dr. Yousuf, testosterone and anxiety and cardiovascular disease, all that kind of stuff, autoimmune in general, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a major trigger is what we're exposing ourselves these days from a content perspective, just because it's all through technology. There's one thing to open a newspaper and read and go to the library and read, but because of our devices and how we're consuming content more and more, I think we have yet to see how insane it's going to be in the next 10, 15 years if we don't encourage a different conversation and a different level of responsibility, both on the development of the content, the technology that outputs it, and us as human beings, how we manage our relationship with it, right? And what does it really do for us at the end of the day, right? So
there are actually quite a few studies out there that look at long-term, that look at gaming. So gaming more on the addiction side. So we're talking about daily use, pornography. There's a lot of studies that show how it can affect an individual's quality of life. And I mean, I agree with what Eric is saying that, I mean, a big part of what it is I do is offering a non-judgmental environment. But at the same time, there's an education piece that needs to happen where individuals, my approach is always to give information. That's the way that I practice. So if I give you a stat or I say, okay, this is what the potential risk is, then it's the responsibility of the person interpreting that information to put it through their lens and assess whether or not it's applicable to them. But yeah, it's interesting.
I'd like to share 3. So early on in my DudeBuddha days, we ran a lot of surveys where I call it, the you know what I know survey. So the moment people complete the survey, everyone gets the results instantly. I'm not trying to hide information or anything. I even tell people, if you want, take the information, write a book with it. I don't own this information. It's our information together, right? So of course, one topic came up was erectile dysfunction, right? And I asked who has experienced it and when did you get the first sign of it? And all men feel it in their early 40s. The softening of their erection, they feel it, but they only do something about it in their late 40s or early 50s, right? Another thing is brain fog. And brain fog, men only start addressing it at 54 to 58, but they feel it as early as their early 40s. They start feeling like lightheaded and they're not sure. And when I take the surveys and the ages, because it's anonymous, right? So I just have all the pertinent information. The men who are in their late 20s and early 30s are even expressing a lack of ability to focus, right? And this is them saying openly, and so now I'm seeing these stats. I don't know what to do about it, but this was only 350 men that answered the quiz, right? So it's not like it's a huge sample size by any means, but I'm blown away by just this community that I get to learn about and learn from and share. But I'd love to hear your perspective as well, based on these findings, and what do you see and what are some things maybe these men can do, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great so actually I see erectile dysfunction occurring in men as young as in their 20s now. Not common, but it does happen. More common in late 20s, 30s would be issues with prostate health. Prostatitis seems to be fairly common right now for an array of reasons. What's really interesting, and we've spoken about this earlier, is that is having the tools and the language for men to actually have the capacity to evaluate what's going on in their body, right? And so I'd be curious to see your surveys and the data from it, because I think that's super fascinating, considering that it's anonymous information from 350 different men and how they're choosing to disclose. I think that's pretty cool.
No problem.
I'll send you my email address. That's awesome.
Yeah, I have 28 surveys I've done across different things. Even there were some business related surveys, right, as well. Who here had over $10 million of investable assets and still don't know what to do with their money? And it was a surprising number, right? Still, I think it was 18% were lost. And they just built a business that made a lot of money. They didn't have RSPs, didn't have any of that stuff taken care of, right? And this is like some of the surveys we would run.
That sounds like a nice problem to have, though, for sure. But if you want to share that with me too, and especially the men's health information stuff, I would love to share some of that information with my audience.
And speaking of that, earlier, I forgot who made the point, about having the right to feel what we feel. I know Jesse had mentioned that as well, but in the group, you know, I had to separate two levels at one point because we talk about shaming and all that stuff. And but now I've kind of combined the group, although the bigger group, not the big group, but the group of very successful men is called the Sensei group. It's not public, right? DudeBuddha is like any men can join, but the Sensei group, these are men with $10 million and up. I had to separate it was in the beginning. I remember one guy wrote, oh, he's 40 million, blah, blah, blah. And he's depression and problems with his marriage and not connecting with his kids. And that's why he's in the dojo. He was in our group because he wanted to overcome his problems. And there are other men who are saying like, dude, you got $40 million. What are you sad about? Just, you could pay to have your problem solved. Right. And so first I booted that guy out of the group with a reason why. I welcomed him back as long as he didn't have to, and he had to come up with a new code name. But that was a challenge with this group is like they're so afraid to say how unhappy they are because they're so filthy rich. Right. But knowing a bunch of these guys, it's the whole masculine thing. It's dominate, provide, win, get bigger, get noticed, you know, let's feed the ego. And then when it's time to be them, they just can't anymore. They've just put on an armor that's like 50 years thick. Right. And so so it's astonishing to learn some of these things. Like at that, their surveys come out slightly different. It's still similar. I find the data is a little similar, but the stories around their problems are different, right? But the problems are similar. They come up around the same time, around the same age as well, you know. And so it's just really interesting, right? I share right back with the group, and I say, hey guys, here's the data. Don't know what to do with it, but you know, if one of you guys know what to do with it, let me know, right? So, but yeah, really, really cool stuff. If we have time, I want us to get through the questions, but I can summarize like a bunch of stages where I asked men. I did a survey with them, and I said, hey, you know, like, tell me about different stage in your life. If you had to identify 4 to 5 stages, what would they be? And if you use 1 to 3 words to describe it, what would those words be? Right. And so I have the results of that, you know, in front of me actually, because I pulled it out as we were speaking. But let's go to the Q&A. Andy, if you want, like up to you,
for
I'll
sure.
let you guide.
That's great. And that's information that we could probably, like I said, if it's reports, if it's data, we could definitely just share that through text as well. If I want to respect everyone's time to share, right? So we'll get to the other ones because there are a lot of questions actually. And that was just actually the first one. So let's get right into, and Tuan, you mentioned it a little bit earlier when you were answering Tommy's question about triggers, right? So it's a bit of a longer question. I wanted to see if you guys can help them out with this. But what are some tactics we can do to not only recognize when triggers hit, but what can we do to let others know that something is up? So I'm assuming that means like when we're triggered by something, how do we, as men, communicate it effectively to somebody else?
In my relationship, I have a code word. I'm like, if I'll say I'm seeing red, and that just means I need to be alone. Leave me alone. I got to process what it is I'm feeling. Talk to you in about 10 minutes. And so that's how and then I have time to like process what it is that I'm feeling. And then I come back into my relationship, and then we're able to actually talk clearly.
I think that's something a lot of men struggle with too, is like not even having to take that time to process. To me, that wasn't even an option sometimes. I would just get anger. Like when I see red, I act red basically, right? So
yeah,
I think that's definitely great advice for sure. Anybody else?
I think it's just about allowing yourself to accept whatever emotions coming through, right? It's like the sort of the underlying thing we've been talking about this whole time is it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. And if you accept it, you'll be more inclined to share it with the people close to you.
Clinically, there's also cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a really effective, well-researched therapy to help individuals kind of understand their triggers and how to maneuver, to live with them and work with them.
Yeah, I also want to add this, you know, oftentimes we deal with this on our own, right? There's this idea of really creating deep awareness of why you're being triggered. But I often challenge men to do this with somebody that you trust, right? Create a space where somebody that you trust can ask you questions and really go through this. Because oftentimes when they're asking you questions, you can get a little bit deeper than you would on your own just by answering those questions. So I always challenge men to choose one person that you can truly trust without judgment, and just explain to them what happened. And I have these men in my life, right? And then they'll just ask me questions. Well, what was going on for you then? And then I'll explain. And then, well, what is it that, you know, your behavior is thinking that way? What is the foundation of that? And then you start going deeper and deeper and deeper. And then you realize that's like a muscle, right, that we're flexing. So I often, I challenge people not to do this work alone all the time. You know, Dr. Yousuf talks about cognitive behavioral therapy, super, super powerful. Works for a lot of people, but yeah, just find somebody that you trust so that you can work through this stuff.
Great advice. Tuan?
Yeah, same. I echo everyone's thoughts here. Basically, I have a meditation that I do pretty much on a daily basis. I actually do it on a daily basis, but it's more of a visualization, and it's going to be funny, but I visualize a lot of crap going in my life that day. Then I visualize myself being rather calm through that process. So it's mental training. And the other thing I was going to say was have someone you can talk to. Eric's my boy. He's the guy who I talked to, and we went for a nice walk, 2 weeks ago, right? And I needed him. I just needed someone to hear me vent the shit out of my my life, and then poof, he asked questions, he provided insight, and it just brings me back to calm. And when I return home, I was a better person to have that conversation with my kids or my wife or whoever, right? So having that person really, really helps.
Thank you, Tuan. And then such great advice from everybody. So we'll move on to the next question. And this is from Ayaz. How does one start so I guess this one's not about yourself, but about another person. So how does one start the conversation of shadow work with family members or close friends?
So I would love to give insight on this. So this is a very powerful question. And I think we've all dealt with this in our lives, of the process of going through change, right? And one thing that is really, really important to understand, I just want to get the gentleman's name, Ayaz. One thing that's really important to understand, Ayaz, is, and I'm going to say this, but you are screwing up their reality, right? And I think a lot of people don't see this, right? They see this transformation as something that's going through, and you have this idea that you're trying to get to a place to better yourself, right? So there's a lot of positives for you. But what's happening and what you're not seeing is these loved ones that you have in your life, they have a perception of you that makes them feel safe, right? And when you start changing, their perception of you is changing, and that's making them feel very unsafe. And you're screwing with their reality. And so that's why there's resistance to it, right? So I think it's really, really important to understand that this is a process. And oftentimes what needs to happen is they need to see the proof, right? So when I stopped drinking, this was, again, I had trouble with alcoholism, being in the service industry. And I had a lot of family members that was like, I quit drinking. The first thing I said was, yeah, right. Sure. Yeah, whatever. You're the drunk. We know you. This is just a thing. You're going to fall off. And it took a very long time for them to really fully accept, like, oh, Eric is sober. This is a thing. It took, over a year. And I think as much as, I was like, why don't they just accept me? How come they can't support me? The reality is I had been a certain way for 10 years. So my 2 months of sobriety was not going to erase those 10 years. So I think it's really important to understand that this is not only a process for you of growing. As much as you want that support, they're unsure about where you're going. And they want to support you, but they want to make sure that you are doing this for the right reasons. And the second thing is, sadly, during this growth journey that we're having, oftentimes we no longer associate with certain people. And I think that is a fear that a lot of people have, right? If you are changing, that means that you might not associate yourself with me because you're changing away from me, right? It's like when we've all seen a friend, right, who loses 70 pounds, and you're like, wow, this changes everything now. Does this mean that we're no longer going to go out and eat burgers together? Does this mean we're no longer going to drink beer together? So like my reality is changing around you. Therefore, I start to be able to, our friendship is threatened. So just keep that awareness, continue to do your work and get people who are supporting you, but understand that sometimes it takes other people a little bit longer to accept your journey. And it just comes from their own, perception.
I love that. Anybody else?
A good message. How many times have any of us, I think back to when I started stand-up and I'd tell my friends or family, oh, I'm going to be a stand-up comedian. Okay. so is everybody else. Like, you know, it's like any hobby or new thing that takes up a lot of your time. People are going to be a little bit, it's human nature, I think, to be a bit skeptical at the beginning. And then over time, if you stick with whatever it is, they'll come around.
And, you know, it's, I think when we talk about kind of change and evolution and, you know, so we look at like Carl Jung and his version of shadow work. We look at the shadow that resides in with all of us, that piece that holds us back from being our authentic self. And we look at and it's navigating that side. So it's similar. It's like what Eric was saying. It's navigating these two relationships when we're, you know, it's the light and the dark. And in my practice, there's a lot of discussion around actually shadow work, which is interesting, in that it's embracing both sides. I believe that you can only move forward when you embrace both. Because the moment that you repress the shadow, and we've all tried to you know, make some sort of a change and ignore that shadow side of us, and then the shadow gets louder and louder and louder, and then overtakes us, and we become defeated, and the whole process of change stops. So a big part of shadow work in my experience is actually navigating those two internal dialogues. And actually empowering both, understanding, giving both a voice. I think it's really important.
Tuan, anything you'd like to add?
Nope, we cool, man. Let's
All
rock
right.
it.
All right. So next question is actually from Sage. How do you see positive masculinity being expressed or showing up for daughters versus sons? I know we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but maybe get a little bit deeper into this.
I guess as a dad of daughters, I'll express. Again, I never really used positive masculine, but as a dad, as a male, I guess, to my daughters, I do my best to support them. And like I said earlier, I support them discovering who they are, letting them know that I accept who they are and learning with them. And then we celebrate who they are and let them know that it's always safe. You see my board here? I'm not sure you guys could see it, but there's three columns here. One says fatherhood, one says entrepreneurship, and the other one says health and wellness. And this is like things that I'm passionate about. In the column of fatherhood, I asked my kids to write down what they think I would be great at talking about, right? And so this is what they wrote. They're writing, and at the bottom, my 17 wrote maintaining an open dialogue, right? And I think like that was, and then the funny thing is I asked them, so they wrote on a piece of paper, I wrote it down here, and then I asked them to come back and rate which ones they thought was ones they thought was one of their favorite ones. And the maintaining open dialogue across at least the 4 older kids, right? The 4 older kids, they all put a check mark beside that one. Right. And so showing for my kids, whether it be male or daughter, I think I did the exact same approach, you know, for my daughter to open up about her sexual orientation. Even at that point, she says, I'm not sure, but I think I'm gay. I'm like, that's cool. Hey, let's run with whatever you feel is right. Right. And I'm so proud of you that you know who you are. Most people don't know who they are till they're like in their late 40s and 50s. For you to be 13 and know who you are, that's amazing. Right. And I share this conversation with all the other kids. So that way, when they're ready to open about something they feel, it's awesome and it's okay. So that's how I think is whether you call it positive masculinity or being an awesome parent, you know, and loving and non-judgmental, right? Whatever you want to call it, right? Whatever you want to label it, you know, like I said, as a joke, I just want to say jokingly, that's my approach, at least.
Yeah.
Passing the mic on to Eric.
Thanks, man. I can add to this. And I just really want to say that we have the opportunity to influence, you know, the younger generation, male and female, whether we're fathers or not. And I think that's really important to see. My kids are being influenced by all kinds of people in their lives. When I think about the influence that I can have on my daughter, I really think about the way that I am treating her mother, because oftentimes that she is going to try to recreate a relationship that she's seeing, right? And she's basing what's okay and not okay on what she's seeing there. So if I'm at home and I am always yelling and criticizing her mother, my wife, she will think that that is totally acceptable for a woman to be criticized in her marriage. And really, because she's most likely going to try to recreate that marriage that she sees, she might actually go and find a man who criticizes her, right? So a man that loves her deeply and constantly shows her affection might be very threatening to her. So what I really want to try to show my daughter, and really my son as well, but especially my daughter, is this is how a woman should be treated by a man who loves her, right? So even to the point of my wife and I, we're very affectionate, and my wife laughs all the time. We try to gross out our kids at least once a day, because we really want our kids to find a relationship where they can be fully open and intimate and with their sexuality, right, in a safe way. Two married people should be able to do that. So I think it's really important to understand the influence that our actions have, right? We've all heard that saying, you know, I think it's really important to think about what is it that you're showing your kids instead of what is it that you're saying to your kids. And so for me, when I look at how I'm influencing my daughter and my son, I just want to live that influence, right? I don't want to be yelling at her mom or my kid's mom and then just all of a sudden go tell them they can't yell at her. Well, there's probably a reason that they're yelling at her, because I'm yelling at her. So I think it's really important to understand that we have the ability to influence everyone around us, even in the workplace, right? Even wherever you are, in your friendship circle. We have this massive amount of influence. So I think it's important in the way that we show up with our actions instead of just telling people how to live.
That's great. Dr. Yousuf and Jesse, anything you want to weigh in on that?
I just love that perspective, Eric, because I grew up with a dad that was super macho, you know, maybe not the best example. And he would always say to us, do as I say, not as I do. And it was like, well, that's great, but it didn't help, you know? So it's great to see that you and others are doing the opposite of that now.
Yeah, we have another saying in our home: your actions are drowning out your words. So sometimes no matter what I'm saying, right, if I tell my kids not to yell and I'm yelling all the time, well, my actions of yelling are drowning out what I'm saying. So I think the opposite is true. You have to see that, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the idea of role modeling is really important to children.
For sure. So we're at 8 o'clock right now, guys. Do you guys have a few extra minutes to answer some questions, or you guys got to go? Yeah, you guys are good? Tuan, father of 7.
I got 10 more minutes.
Okay, let's do 10 more minutes. Okay, so next question is from Tommy. If you had to pick one thing or way that we may shift from toxic masculinity to healthy masculinity, what would it be? Just one thing.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was, if you had to pick one thing or way that we may shift from toxic masculinity to healthy masculinity, what would it be?
Asking for help.
Yeah, I would say ownership is a big one for me, right? Taking ownership of yourself, your actions, what you do. I think that's really important.
I would say validate yourself. What you feel is okay and it's real.
Antoine, still thinking?
All three.
Yeah.
No. So I was gonna say, reach out for help. Reach out to someone who can support you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if I'm allowed to pick one, I would probably say self-awareness. I think is very, very important. It starts with you, I think. Okay, next question. It's from Natasha. Hot take or interesting controversial topic. Would love to hear your opinion on incels.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's incels? Sorry, I don't know what that is.
So basically, it's just a movement. It's basically like the demon version of DudeBuddha, basically. So, just like they're the involuntary celibates. It's just a group of I think to describe it like angry men online in a forum who I guess they would be the anti-feminist movement, and they are saying just guys are treating unfairly right now and things like that. So, in a nutshell.
Maybe a little bit more hateful too.
Yeah, very kind of like violently charged, right? As for example, that guy in Toronto with that van attack on Yonge Street who ran over about I think 10, 11 people just right in the middle of the day. He was one of those incels actually, so he was known to be a person to frequent that forum. So very unhealthy stuff. I mean, if I was to take a stab to give you guys a chance to actually think about it, the incel movement to me is just a manifestation of anger, rage, stemming from issues that we've all talked about tonight with masculinity. dealing with their insecurities, which lead to, problems with anger, frustration, aggression, control issues. And obviously a lot of these guys are afraid to, talk about this because, same issues with men's mental health. They don't get out, they don't get a chance to share their opinion and talk to other people too much. They will go on a forum anonymously, where people don't know where they are, and they will share their opinion with other men or other people, whoever's on these forums, to share voice their own opinions, feel like they have that sense of community, and rile each other up, and to the point where you see violence like this happening. And this is one of the reasons why I do this, why I put this together, why we do this, is to come together and to get guys to think about healthier ways to deal with your frustration and anger, so that there's no violent attacks on that scale and even bigger scales, right? With war, like politicians who get into war, and where war is like one of the first things that pop in their head when there's a conflict. Like, this is that aggression comes from somewhere, and we're all trying to figure out where that aggression comes from and how to deal with it healthy, so that there are no things like that. There's no more van attacks, there's no more terrorist attacks, there's no more like attacks on women, attacks on anything like that. So to me, I feel very passionate about being able to help these people find healthier ways to cope, and healthier forums like DudeBuddha, and looking at talks like this one where we hear you, we see what you're doing, but there's a healthier way to do it. You don't have to hurt people. So I don't know, that's just my message, my opinion about that.
I feel like I live in a bubble. So I'm aware of these groups, but I'm not aware to the extent to which they exist. Like, is this a very large movement, or is this just a small sector of individuals who have kind of gotten together and created these platforms?
I would say it's large enough for them to be big problems. It's large enough to be an issue. It's large enough for reason for guys to be mindful and be aware that it exists, and that it is a problem that requires attention, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's like, it goes back to mental health, which you were talking about earlier. And it goes, I don't want to, if you, I mean, there's like a lot of controversial answers. So I think that the reason why a lot of us are kind of struggling to come up with or say something, we all seem to be hesitating a little bit, or maybe I'm being presumptuous, but it's the controversial answer is that if you restrict someone's ability to express themselves in a healthy way, right? So remember I was talking earlier about like a Caucasian heterosexual male not being able to express or having to censor his feelings. That's going to build up a certain level of frustration in an individual who doesn't have potentially severe mental health related issues. So if someone then all of a sudden who has a pre-existing mental health, I'm saying it's mental health related issue, and you put them into this kind of constrained zone, they're going to lash out, right? And so they're going to need to be able to vent in this unhealthy manner, this energy that's building within them. So that would be my thoughts. But again, I wouldn't say this is the term. So same with Tuan. I wasn't aware of what the term was. I was not familiar. So I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
I think oh, sorry.
If I could just say one more thing. There is a group, a place in Ottawa. There's one in Toronto, one in Ottawa. I can't remember the name of it, but it offers services to men who are underrepresented, who are in divorce, right? So it's free legal services to make sure that in divorce, the man's rights are looked after. And there's a huge movement against this about 5 or 6 years ago, and there were protests in Toronto. And so this is just an example of on the flip side, right? So an organization that's put together to represent equality between men and women, men who can't afford legal services in divorce, to give them the opportunity to get custody, right? To get some sort of, in some cases, spousal support, so it's balanced between both genders. And that was also pushed down. So it's like we're in this like really touchy topic, and I hope that I haven't offended anyone. I tried to kind of stay somewhere in the middle, because it's a confusing topic, right?
One?
Yeah, I like I said, I didn't know what that meant, but if it's a community that is exercising ultra aggression where it can create harm on people, what do I feel about it? I mean, if that's the question, my opinion, well, I really disagree with it. That's pretty straightforward. What I think of these people, I don't know them. Like there's groups that still, there's groups out there that are still trying to fight that the Earth is flat, right? That COVID is a hoax, even that the virus is a Chinese virus, right? I'm somehow Vietnamese and lumped into the Chinese virus, right? Like I disagree with all these movements. But then I also think about the big picture, the whole point of pendulum and yin yang. All these things happen from a bigger picture for some kind of reason, and it's gonna create some kind of opposite effect and response, and eventually like a shower, it'll find its medium somewhere where it's less violent, where people are going to figure out that it's unfair, and then it starts all over again somewhere else, right? So, but the question was the opinion of these groups. Well, I don't like it. I would never join it. I would never try to join something that encourages some form of violence. Sharing your anger about situations, that's cool. But at the moment someone starts showing pictures that they're beating up on women, well, I think those groups should be completely shut down and dealt with.
For
Yeah, I
sure.
couldn't agree more.
Definitely. So guys, we're at 8:10 right now. So I guess that concludes our call tonight. So I wanted to thank you guys all personally, all the attendees. If you guys are still there, I saw some of your positive feedback. So I'm really thankful and really grateful that you guys got something from this. Again, we want you guys to continue this conversation forward, have these talks with basically just anybody who will listen, and let them know that it's okay to open up. We're here, it doesn't make us any less of a man that we were here talking tonight for 2 hours. Again, if you guys have any final messages or, any shout outs to anybody or, where they can find you, here's your chance, folks.
I just want to quickly share just before we kind of jump off the call. As a man, reach out, or even as a woman, as anyone, reach out to people in your network to make sure they're doing okay. I daily send messages to somebody, and it's literally just a text of, "Hey, how are you doing?" ? And then really ? Because I think it's important to just check in on people and give them space to just talk if they want. So, I highly encourage everyone, just reach out to somebody you haven't talked to in a while. Just make sure they're doing okay. That's what humanity is about. I know we will say we're going to do it. We're all going to get off this call, maybe not do it, but that's totally fine. Just try to make that a regular thing. Reach out to people in your network. Just make sure they're doing okay during these challenging times.
Anybody like to go next? Final words.
I think that's good advice. If you want us to plug ourselves, follow my podcast. And you know what? You know what's interesting? It's called Jesse and Jenna's Messy Podcast. That's not what's interesting, but one of the segments we do is it's sort of like an advice column. It's a comedy podcast, so it's very funny. But we've grown to a point now where people actually send us in letters, and a lot of the time they're anonymous. A lot of them are from men dealing with issues in their relationship, thinks his wife's cheating on him, or curious about his sexuality, different things. So some of the topics we've hit on tonight have come up on our podcast, and real letters from people out there that are writing us anonymously. So if you're interested in that sort of voyeurism, check it out. Jesse and Jenna's Messy Podcast.
Awesome.
I think I think again, it's important to ask for help. It could be with anyone, a friend, a family member, a life coach, a therapist, a naturopathic doctor, whoever. I think what's important is to find somebody that you resonate with, someone that you trust, someone that you feel that you can be yourself and be in a place of healing, to allow you just to express whatever it is that you're feeling, and to work with someone who's going to help you transition to where it is you want to go. In terms of plugging, I am not a social media guy at all, although it might have sounded like I was with Facebook. I'm actually zero social media, totally inept. But I do have Instagram, and I seem to get followers by asking people face to face, could you please follow my Instagram? So I think it's like linked to something. So please follow my Instagram. I have like, I don't know, 200 people following it or something. Let's try to make it like 210. Much appreciated.
Awesome. So I will be
You just
sharing.
got 5 more.
Okay, go ahead, Tuan.
I would say first, thank you to the men here. You guys are incredible, and to the audience. This was really, really just an amazing experience and evening. So really grateful. The other thing is, I would say straight up, take it easy on yourself, forgive yourself, be compassionate. I know how hard we can be ourselves. And if you got to, get off of social media for at least 2 weeks, if not a month, and take time to yourself, be with nature. I would also say, try to find that kid in you. As you can see, I goof around, I joke, and I don't even take myself seriously. So, try to do things that bring out that kid in you. If you don't really know who that kid in you is, then try to support in charitable initiatives that involve children, where you can help kids' lives be better, and that'll bring out that caring nature that's inside of you that you can now reflect upon yourself. So you could take it easy on yourself, right? And I think that's a great step towards being healthier mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually.
Thank you for that, Tuan, and thank you all you guys. I feel richer for having been able to sit here for the last 2 hours to talk with you guys, and I'm so happy that you guys are my friends, at least on Facebook. It's such a strong community, and everyone else, these guys, we're available. We're in the community. We're here in Ottawa, so you guys know where you guys can go for help. So again, thank you guys for joining us, and I wish everyone
before we sign out, before I
Oh.
interrupt you, sorry, Andy. I want to mention that a good way that you can support men's mental health is by donating to Andy's Movember.
Yeah, that's right.
So a link was shared in the chat. I'll send it again just in case. And yeah, that's another great way. Movember donates a lot of money to help support men's mental health, suicide prevention, testicular cancer awareness, and prostate cancer.
Thank you very much, Nick.
And thanks for having us, Andy. It was great to meet all you guys.
For sure. Great to have you guys on call. You guys have a great night, okay?
Much love, everyone.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Take care.